This is the EVP Podcast.
It is the EVP Podcast with your host, DVO.
I'm Beaker.
And Ghosty's here.
Welcome back, everybody. We're glad you've joined us. You excited for another spooky tale?
I'm fascinated.
Is it spooky?
It's interesting.
I'm going to be scared.
And I'm going to be fascinated.
Nice.
And I'm going to be horny.
Yeah, Discovery Plus, pick us up. Scared, fascinated, and horny.
We are ready. All right, I want to share this story. So I listened to this podcast. In fact, if you guys don't listen to this podcast, The Confessionals, it's a really good podcast. It started off as a Bigfoot podcast. It's turned into
Everything.
anything. Yeah, it's kind of turned into everything. It's pretty cool. I enjoy it. They gave us a shout out one time. We put it on our reels, so you can listen to the shout out.
Oh, is that who did that?
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so that's the Confessionals podcast. And this episode was called The Time Traveling Alien Abduction. This was episode 91 that was released in 2018. We've talked about it. I shared this with Ghosty, gosh, years ago. Yeah, probably after I heard it. And I shared it with you, and we kind of talked about it a little bit, kind of mentioning it here and there. But I don't remember this episode when it was, because there's like, The Confessionals has maybe 400 or 500 episodes.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I don't remember which episode this one was. Well, somehow it got brought to my attention. It was episode 91, if you guys want to listen to the whole interview with the guy named Tony Rodrigues. But we're going to break it down for you. We're going to share the story with you. I want to hear your guys' thoughts about it. And share everything. I do want to hear about it.
You don't want to hear my thoughts.
Tony Rodrigues, he also wrote a book that was recently just released February 2022. It's called Ceres Colony Cavalier. Ceres spelled as in Ceres, which is a potential planet near Mars. Ceres Colony Cavalier by Tony Rodrigues. And it's spelled with S's, not Z's, if you want to look him up. And I just thought it was interesting. What he says is that he did a 20-year mission for the government at the moon in Mars. At 10 years old, he was abducted, did a 20-year mission, returned back to his 10-year-old self. We're going to go into the details. I have found 5 other people with similar stories. And I'm going to look into these too, just kind of, I'm curious of the story. Captain K, Corey Good, Andrew Basario, Randy Kramer, and John Tidor, or Tidor.
The second.
The second. You didn't know that part. So these 6 gentlemen have all claimed to have a story where they've worked and done work on Mars and the moon and different things like that. I've heard a lot of different stories about the dark side of the moon, underground bases on other planets. I don't know if you guys have also heard of similar things.
I'll
like
show
this.
you the dark side of the moon.
Please do.
Or is it red? But it's red down.
The red side of the moon. The ginger side of the moon.
The ginger moon.
The ginger moon.
So I thought,
I don't that funny.
It was good.
It's a good one.
Sorry.
I don't know if any of these guys are making this up. They could be. They might not be. Who knows? There's
The
things we'll never know.
shadow knows.
Unless you go.
Unless you go. So anyway, I thought, let's retell this story. Our listeners, our viewers, they can take that information and they can decide if they believe it or if they want to look more into it. I find it fascinating. If it really happened, this is super fascinating. If it didn't happen, it's great entertainment, like a movie, right? You watch a movie, you know that's not real. It's great entertainment.
Let's get into it then.
Either way.
You know what?
What?
So, this reminds me of a comment. You said, we're going to retell this guy's story.
Okay.
So we retold, I can't remember the guy's name, it was the episode we did with the former Area 51 employee, right?
Yeah.
Someone on YouTube commented and said, why would we retell that story and do a crappy job of doing it? So here we are again, retelling somebody else's story, but we don't do a crappy job, I don't think. I think we do a pretty decent job.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time doing research on this.
We do, and we did on that one too. Like, I know there's going to be the haters that they don't believe a story, and if you don't believe it, that's fine, that's okay. We're telling you what this guy said happened to him.
And at the end, I've got questions, right? Because these questions weren't asked to this individual. I've got questions that we'll ask among us.
Yeah, I got questions for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And maybe you guys have questions that maybe we'll be able to get into that.
The answers.
I hope you do.
All right, so a little bit of backstory. I kind of mentioned it. So Tony Rodrigues, it's called a 20 and back, right? I guess it's a common phrase, 20 and back. In 1982 is when he did this. So at the age of 10 is when he was taken. Just remind you of all this. After he came back to his 10-year-old self, he doesn't remember any of this stuff. Again, he's 10 years old. He goes to sleep, wakes up. It's like a brand new day to him. But in April 2015, Tony started getting some bad headaches. He had an MRI done. Shortly after, memory started coming back to him. Other things that Tony believes in, that he might have been cloned. So if you think of like the sheep, they were cloned. The clones never made it, right? They all kind of passed away shortly after. I don't know the whole story of the cloning sheep. I remember it happening. I don't remember.
No, they live now.
Okay.
I think it was Dottie.
Yeah.
Sheep.
But he believes that we as humans, we have a spark of life inside of us. Maybe you call it your soul, whatever you want. He calls it a spark.
I believe in Transformers, they call it the Allspark.
The Allspark, yes.
We said as long as you had electric connectivity or an electric current, they can use that.
Okay, yeah.
But he talked about that, like you're a starfish.
Yeah, and he thinks his spark was transferred from his real body, his 10-year-old body, and into a clone.
Into a vegetable.
Right. And in space, this is what's happening out in space. Hundreds of ships fly out daily, run errands, and then return back in time for dinner. He also claims after World War II, Germans colonized a small planet near Mars called Ceres. There were underground cities and underground bases. At the time, there's about 250,000 human population there on this planet, along with 2 other ET species. They all live together. He also believes that there are sex trafficking rings for the super rich with kids. Kids are being traded as slaves to serve missions on the moon and Mars. He also claims MK Ultra is real. The U.S. government has access to alien technology. And there are ETs that monitor our time travel. There's the reptilians, or the Draco Empire. They have jurisdiction over our solar system and in our time travel. They're monitored. And the Germans made a treaty with them. Also, those reptilians eat people. Okay? Yeah, I'm not saying it's fake. I'm not saying it's real. I'm just telling you the story, and I find it fascinating. So here's what happened. In 4th grade, Tony was picked for an advanced learning class. There was another kid picked as well that Tony didn't get along with because the kid was a little bit more rich and smart, and it made Tony feel a little inferior.
I think they called the class TAG, correct? It was like talented and gifted.
Yes, that's exactly right. Tony walked up to a group that were kind of talking. It was that kid and a bunch of the girls, and they were saying that the kid could read minds. And they were like, "Oh, read Tony's mind." And he didn't really. He was a little hesitant. But they kind of coaxed him into it. So he's like, "Okay." So Tony looked at the kid and thought to himself, "You are just so ugly. None of these girls would really like you." This kid just was looking at him, made a face of disgust at Tony, and just was like, "I don't want to do this," and walked away. He just didn't want to read his mind after he did that. And Tony didn't think much about it. Later down the road, the kid's dad was at the school judging a science fair. And that kid walked up to Tony and said that his dad is in the Illuminati, kind of in a bragging way. "My dad's in the Illuminati. What does your dad do?" He's like, "Well, my dad works at GM," or something like that.
Well, and keep in mind, like, he's in 4th grade.
Yeah,
he's
4th grade.
10 years old. He didn't know what the hell the Illuminati
Yeah,
was. He's
yeah.
like, okay, cool. My dad is a mechanic.
Right. But he didn't like how the kid was like so braggadocious. Again, Tony didn't like this kid, okay? He didn't like how he was so like braggadocious about it. "My dad's in the Illuminati." Then later, the kid pointed out Tony to his dad and said, "Hey, Dad, that's the one that ruined my confidence." The kid and his dad started talking in a way that Tony didn't even understand. But then the kid told his dad, "Well, he doesn't deserve that." And then his dad replied, "You need to manage your resources." So, weird kind of little conversation. That night, or maybe a few nights later, you can't really remember exactly when it happened, but it could have been that night or maybe within a couple nights. A gray, right, those are the gray aliens, they came into Tony's room, At first, it kind of woke Tony up. He thought it was his dad wearing a mask. So he reached up to grab the mask, but then he noticed that the mask was really the face of a gray. It felt cold, wet, and porous. That's how he just explained it. Tony started to screech, but then became frozen. So there's a gray over him. Then he saw two reptilians in the room with hoods on. There was a flash of light, and then Tony woke up in a lab. This is what kind of the abduction kind of takes place.
So when he was in this lab, they were communicating telepathically.
Mm-hmm.
So they were telling him that they were going to borrow his consciousness for the next 20 years, and that he should feel lucky that he's going to get an extra 20 years to live.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah, so they're telling him all about how cool this is going to be, and that 20 years is the max. Can't go beyond that because after 20 years, people seem to go insane. So they've tried this. Well, anyways, he thought there was an alien invasion going to happen because of this, and he was excited because he's like, I knew you guys were real. I knew it. So he's all ecstatic about these guys actually being in his face, and he's witnessing this. But then he's also saying that he doesn't want to leave his parents because he can't grow up without his parents. So they tell him that they're going to return him like as if only a few minutes had passed. So he'll be the same age when he gets back. He won't even remember it, and it'll be like it's just another day. So he decides, that's going to be pretty cool. And they strapped him down and inserted a needle into him. When he woke up, he was in the hospital with a human doctor and a nurse giving him a checkup, and there was about a dozen other kids who were going through a trauma-based mind manipulation program similar to the MK Ultra program. Mm-hmm. So they were trying to bring out the psychic abilities out of these kids, and when they were doing that, they were giving them like sleep deprivation and then putting alarms on so they couldn't actually get good sleep. They were like every hour doing this to keep them psychotic, I guess. I don't know. They were also being drugged, given psychedelics and hallucinogenics, and they were forced to watch violent movies, Disney movies, videos of animal torture, and it was just like constant, over and over and over again. And then one of the times, they purposely dislocated Tony's arm. And
The shoulder.
Yeah, and was forced to just sit there in pain and watch more of these movies. And I don't think he even said why they did that. They just did it just to see his reaction to stuff.
Probably.
And then after this went on for so long, he ended up getting sold off. And he remembers this later, but he first gets sold to this place in Seattle and then gets sold to Peru. But we'll get back to Seattle in a second. So when he's in Peru, he was helping smuggle drugs to Colombia. And they were also doing this mind manipulation stuff to him while he was doing that, and he would black out. And when he would be blacked out and he'd come back, they would tell him all these fantastic things he was doing. He was speaking other languages fluently.
Oh, yeah.
He was talking to deceased relatives of people and giving them answers to things that they needed.
Yeah, so he didn't know any Spanish at all.
No.
And they said when he had these blackouts, because he had like a person that was assigned to him that translated for him, but when he had these blackouts, he spoke Spanish perfectly.
And
Right.
the blackouts because they drugged him.
And then when he'd wake up, he would be sick. Like, he was sick up until the point when he would recover, they'd have him do it again. And then after he hit puberty, it was like his abilities were going away. And he wasn't as sharp or as quick, or things wouldn't connect as good. So they sold him back to the original buyers of him in Seattle. And those people were a satanic worshiping, well, this guy, he was a satanic worshiping billionaire. And so he was there again from the ages of 13 to 16. And the boys would be in one area and girls in another. And it was more like an orphanage. And every morning they had to take a couple pills, and they would play board games, they'd go swimming. But a few times out of the year, they would throw these big shindigs, and these kids would come out as sex slaves. And they would do these satanic worshiping rituals and all this crazy stuff. And one of the times he talked about, they ended up sacrificing one of these kids. And they were drinking his blood and passing around this goblet of his blood. And they were also cutting off pieces of flesh and forcing people to eat them. And when he tried to give it to Tony and he wasn't trying to do it, they told him, well, you can be up there next. And, that can be you. Just you better do it. So he ends up doing it. And they ended up trying to do this ritual to get this thing to walk out of the fire. So they were asking Tony, do you want to learn your new name? Like they were trying to give him a new name.
Mm-hmm.
And they're having him like putting his face to the fire. And he said he was seeing this thing walking out of it, but it didn't actually come out and it didn't finish. Like the ritual didn't complete. And the billionaire was just trying to like, oh, probably this, it's probably that, it's probably, just kind of come up with excuses. And I don't think anything went from there. Like they didn't do it again.
No, so I think what they kept telling him, he wasn't like, at first, because he wouldn't take the new name, they were saying he wasn't strong enough to withstand the heat of the fire and that, and they kept pushing his face towards it. And then he said he finally said, okay, I'll take the name. He doesn't remember the name was because he really didn't care.
He didn't ever use it.
He didn't want the name. But I guess once he accepted the new name, the fire wasn't hot for him anymore. And they're like, see, now you're strong enough to withstand the fire.
Mm.
And then, so those couple pills that they would take every day, they were switched out and it was making him sick. So he asked if he could take the old ones again. But then they kept threatening him that they were going to send him to the military. They're like, how about you just shut up or we'll send you to the military?
He said the whole time that was always a big threat. Like, they will send you to the military. If you don't do this, you're going to the military.
And then he said just one day he was on an errand, and while he was on that errand, two guys just grabbed him, pulled him into a van, gave him a shot in the arm, and he woke up on the moon.
The moon?
The moon. That big cheesy thing in the sky.
The green cheese.
Mm-hmm.
Is the moon even real?
No.
I'll tell you what the moon doesn't do. Give off light.
No, it doesn't. Reflects it, though.
It reflects a lot of light.
That's a rock. So on the moon, there's the dark side. Everybody knows about the dark side of the moon. If you don't, it's the side of the moon we can't see because of the rotation of the moon around the Earth. Science. On the dark side of the moon is where Leonard Nimoy hid the pillars for the Transformers to bring Cybertron to the Earth.
What?
But not really.
Okay.
So actually on the dark side of the moon, according to Tony, there is a military base with military personnel guarding and working at the base. He said when he arrived at the base, he and others entered an arena. There was a crowd in the stands watching them, like in a gladiator pit, kind of like the Coliseum, I guess.
Yeah.
At the other end of the arena, doors opened up, and there was this giant 400-pound spider that they released. And I probably would have died because I don't like spiders.
You just lay on the
I
ground.
was just fetal position. You treat giant spiders like bears, right? You just go up in the fetal position and hope they don't eat you. So,
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know what I would have done if I saw a 400-pound spider. I'm just like, I would have pieced out. I would have unalived myself. I'm just like, I don't want any part of this.
Oh, that would be scary.
So in comes this giant spider, right? Well, the kids were given these canisters, and they were told it would explode them and anything near them. The crowd was yelling at the kids and jeering them on, yelling because saying, like, you're all going to die.
Spider's going to get you.
Yeah, they were rooting for the spider. Screw these kids.
You're right.
We want the spider to
But it's
win.
like kind of the gladiator theme, right? Because wouldn't they be with tigers or lions, and the crowd would kind of cheer on the lions and tigers.
They want chaos.
Russell
Yeah.
Crowe showed up. He fought the giant spider. And no, actually, so the crowd wanted these kids to die. So one of the kids, I guess, tucked the canister under his arm like a football and ran right at the spider. He crawled up its leg towards the head of the spider, and he detonated his canister, blowing up the spider's head, and he blew his own body in half. And
Kamikaze style.
yes. I guess the kids left the arena, and they were told they did a great job. Good job, kids. Pat on the back, here's some candy. The doctors also told him that the kid actually survived. The kid that blew himself up actually survived this, and even though Tony never saw him again. And the next day, they were on Mars. So this is where he talked about
The spark.
The spark, as long as there's some kind of electromagnetic activity going on in your brain, even if it's just your head, as long as there's some electricity still going on in your brain, that the aliens could regrow your entire body.
Which is probably why that kid survives.
Yeah, so I guess they got his body, or at least the torso half, in time while it still had some energetic spark in it, and they were able to.
I wonder if
keep
they
him
just
alive.
have like a generic bodies just ready to go, and then just depending on what color they are, they just inject some melanin and
It's like Futurama, where they have all the heads in the jars.
yeah,
They
but
just
just
keep
put
the
them on a
heads
body.
alive. That's how Richard Nixon became the president again. So he's on Mars now
All right.
after this gladiator event with the giant spider. I probably, I might have been like this kid. I would have ran up and like, die, bitch. I just don't, no spiders. I would have cried.
If it was a splash, you'd be like,
It was Squatch. I would be like,
You're
hey,
like, Dad,
cousin. I'm
cousin.
only part Squatch. So he wakes up on Mars. And when he gets there, he's, him and some others, they were seated in a wide triangular transport ship heading from the moon to Mars. Okay. However, they had to sit in orbit for about 2 hours because of some incident happening. Something happened on Mars, so they weren't able to land right away. The ship turned off the zero gravity, and a lot of the kids were enjoying floating around the ship. Like that's something
I'd be all about it.
I would love to do that sometime. Like they have those like simulations.
Right,
At least
right.
I know they have the zero gravity training for astronauts. Like I think
Uh-huh.
that would be fun to just like, because I'm fat, I'd be able to float without water.
Look how quick I am now.
Be like, yeah, come get me.
But in this part, he mentions how he was scared and he stayed buckled in,
Yes.
and that part made it seem very like a real thought. You know what I mean? That was such a real
Having a fear.
having a fear of that and throwing that in. You know what I mean? That I don't know. I just thought that was like a key moment in his story
Well-
that he talks about things when he mentions things like that.
Well, bigger going because he had another feeling.
Well, he said
as
this
well.
was his biggest regret of not enjoying floating in space in zero gravity.
That's
Because
another feeling.
he
Mhm.
never had the opportunity to do it again. It was like a
Yeah.
once thing here.
He said they did like less gravity sometimes, but that was the only time it was zero.
Yeah. So finally, I guess the incident got cleaned up. The incident management vehicle, they did their job. They cleaned up the mess, and they got to land. They went to some underground base. Now, on this base, there was U.S. Marines working there, and Tony and some of the other kids would go out with the soldiers and do these missions. Okay. Now, the soldiers, they wore like camouflage armor, like heavy duty stuff, and the kids wore this like white environmental suit, and I guess they had some guns. And he was saying like these environmental suits were probably like the most comfortable piece of clothing he's ever worn in his
Yeah.
entire life.
I want to get my hands on some of this because I would love some really comfortable clothes,
Me too.
to like hang out in.
I said that him and the kids they were used as bait, is what he came to the conclusion. So on one of the missions they were going out to, there was this really bad storm that came through and kind of separated the group. From the soldiers and 3 kids went in one direction, and Tony and the 2 other kids stayed on course. Now they were given this map, and they were told, like by their overlords, the aliens or whatever, like, hey, stay where we can see you, right? And part of the group, some of the kids are like, no, we should go this way, and Tony and the people he ended up with are like, no,
Yes, some of us should go so the soldiers can see us, and then Tony and the group were like, no, we just stay on the course.
we should stay on the course. We should go where the map tells us to go. So off the other group went. He kept following the path like they were supposed to. And then, let's see, then all of a sudden these bugs started chasing them. There were large spiders like the one on the moon.
It made it sound like it wasn't as big as that one. Like that one on the moon was like a really big 400-pound.
Well, that was the gladiator spider.
Yeah, it was the gladiator spider.
The Hulk
that
one
spider.
was Andre the Giant.
That was the Hulk spider.
These ones are like Rey Mysterio Jr. if you follow wrestling at all. So like little spiders, and then some that looked like beetles.
Yeah, like little beetles.
Yeah. And then so they're on Mars. They're running, which it's probably no gravity, so they were more likely like kind of hopping. At one point, Tony he fell down, and the other 2 kind of passed him. And he got up and tried to shoot at one of the smaller beetles, but he missed. About that time, one of the spiders came up and bit Tony's arm off and stood on top of him. And he started. So he said while this was going on, while this spider was standing on top of him. He could hear the other two kids being ripped apart.
Like he could hear their crunching.
Yeah.
You can hear the bones crunching, the flesh tearing, all of that. So he started to panic, and because he was losing a lot of blood at this point, because he's missing an arm.
Yeah.
Now I guess they in part of their suit they were each given like this auto tourniquet, like it was a one-time use thing. It's supposed to like you kind of put it on the area and it kind of knew what to do to stop the bleeding. And he was wanting this for his one arm, and he wasn't able to get it right away.
And then the soldiers in their armor built in was also like tourniquet type of.
Yeah, the soldiers had the really good stuff.
Yeah.
The kids are like, you're screwed. Sorry.
And because of the like less gravity, their armor could be loaded with a whole bunch of stuff, and they could move easily because they weren't weighed down by the soldiers.
So this is what his thought is. He's like, I need to get this tourniquet. At this point, the spider had picked him up, and there was this mantis type bug that came up,
But it was beautiful.
Yeah, he's had a little crush on it.
Yeah, God, this is the prettiest bug I've ever
I want
seen.
to have your babies.
You touch your antenna.
So that's what happened. The antenna touched him in the mind, and it started like reviewing all of his memories. It started going through his head and like just replaying like everything. And he said the mantis and him, they were talking to each other kind of like in a dream state, and Tony started begging for his life. The mantis looked over the beetle and said something in the alien language. He didn't know what they were saying. And then all of a sudden the beetle just kind of like bit his foot off.
I mean, he didn't kill him, so that's,
Yeah, it almost seemed like the beetle asked the mantis, so can I just take a foot at least? He's like, go ahead.
I'm pretty sure I've seen that in a movie. I was just watching Lord of the Rings when they want to kill the hobbits. I'm like, we can take their legs. They don't need those.
when they're trying to eat them.
Yeah, in Two Towers. So yeah, the beetle bites his foot off, and at this point, he's in a lot of pain because now he's missing a foot and an arm.
Yeah.
And I guess they just let him go. He was able to crawl over to his two dead friends and grab their tourniquets and patch up his foot and his arm. And the soldiers ended up finding Tony, and they helped him get back to the base. When he finally woke up, I don't know how many days later it was.
Well, they were trying to keep him awake because he was passing out.
Oh, they were trying to keep him awake.
Yeah.
They would slap him, and they would talk to him, and they told him to watch for the purple sunset. You can see this really cool purple sunset. Now, when they arrived at the base, that's when they let Tony pass out. He woke up. Like I said, I don't know how much later it was. When he woke up, he didn't really say. But his arms and feet had been repaired. Everything was there. Nothing was missing. They asked Tony what the bugs had said to him. He replied with, the bugs kept telling him, like, hey, we're not that stupid. Like, we know what you guys are doing. So he knew that they were sending the kids out as bait to draw the bugs out so the soldiers could, like, annihilate them. And so after that, they stopped doing that. Because they're like, oh, the bugs are onto us.
They know what we're up to.
And then he stayed on the base for about 4 to 6 more weeks.
Yeah, at this point, then he ends up going back to that Ceres colony, that other planet near Mars. So he was transferred there, and he worked on spaceships for about 6 to 8 years. He was working on spaceships, and he hated it. He said it felt like Groundhog Day. Every day was the same. He hated it. Again, this is the same planet that the Germans inhabited after World War II, and that they share this planet with 2 other alien species. Then eventually Tony started running cargo to Diego Garcia. I was trying to look this up. He just mentioned Diego Garcia like it was supposed to be like a known thing. So I looked it up. I think this is a Navy moving company for the Navy. So I don't know if you mentioned it, but like on Mars, I believe the U.S. Marines was working there, he said.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And now they're running cargo for possibly a Navy, for the Navy, Diego Garcia. Tony said that they would make trades with alien races. So they were making trades. The aliens would want things that we would make here on Earth. So things like aspirin and coffee were like big commodities.
So that coffee was like a drug to them.
Yeah, so coffee was like a drug to them. I mean, it's like a drug here to people too. Though.
People are addicted to it.
Yeah.
With the caffeine.
So they wanted like our aspirin and coffee, and we wanted their tech. We're like, give us some of that technology, yo.
Aspirin and coffee. Isn't that what you take after a hangover? Like you wake up with a hangover, you
aspirin and coffee? I don't know. I don't know about that
I-
detail.
I
makes us feel
remember-
better, but to them it makes them feel like
I remember
extra
growing
better.
up, like that's how you cured a hangover. It was like a cold shower, aspirin, and coffee.
Gatorade and smothered burritos were the thing for me.
In the 80s,
Laying in bed for
Like-
8 hours, throwing up.
I
works
remember
for
that in
me.
the 80s and 90s. Like they tell you, like, oh, take a cold shower. I don't know why I learned this in elementary school, like how to fix a hangover. But
80s movies.
80s movies probably it was a cold shower, coffee, and aspirin. That was the cure for a hangover.
That's hilarious.
I remember that growing up, like watching that on TV or something.
I knew as a kid, I remember my cousins giving me some random nasty stuff. Here, this will help, and it just made me throw up more.
That's hilarious.
But you drank? I didn't drink as a kid. I just remember seeing this stuff.
Mm.
This guy.
Mm.
So, at this series colony, Tony said, and again, this was like 20 years ago that he was there. While he was there was a lot of construction happening. And, like, there were buildings and all sorts of stuff happening on this planet that is near Mars. So, that was like 20 years ago. He's very curious what it's like today. Because if it was that advanced 20 years ago, he thinks probably today it's pretty advanced.
Well, this point would be like 22 years ago. So he said that for them, it was actually more like, for like Earth time, it would be like 20 years, right? But it was more like 18.
Yeah.
Because he said something about them being able to squeeze like 36 hours into like a 24-hour day.
Probably the size of the planet turning.
Time zones, you know?
Yeah, the time zone.
The time zone.
The time zones.
So he said it was more like 18 years, like our time,
Yeah.
but like 20 years.
So their
time.
days are probably just a little longer.
Mhm.
Yeah, like you said, it was about a 36-hour day into a 24-hour Earth day.
24-hour time, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Tony did this 20 years. He returned back home with his 10-year-old self. During the 20 years he was out, he did not remember his family at all. It was at one point with the mantis that was kind of going through his memories, and they kind of found his bedroom in his old house, where he was like, this is who you really are. But for the majority of the time, he did not remember his family or anything like that. Once Tony got home, he didn't remember his 20-year stint until he got that MRI because he started getting headaches. So I don't know where the stemming of the headaches came in. Where are we at now, the time marker, roughly?
33?
So this was a 2-hour episode. So that's kind of what we're doing this also. It's like we're taking this 2-hour interview and we just condensed it down to 30 minutes for you, okay? So you're welcome. And it wasn't also in chronological order when he told the story on the interview. So I just put it in order in our notes. Also, you're welcome. Everyone's welcome. That's why that guy's asking why we're doing that. We're going to make it easier for you. So that 2-hour interview, we put in 30 minutes. Now let's talk about it a little bit.
Okay. Here we go.
So,
What are your questions?
Okay. I mean,
Where do you want to start? Do you want to start with questions?
let me
maybe
ask
one-
this question, because
Okay.
this is the one that was really bothering me.
Okay.
Okay, so if he leaves and goes somewhere for 20 years,
Uh-huh.
and then they bring him back at the same moment he was taken,
Right.
the 20 years that he just spent, did that get erased by him coming back?
Wait, say it again.
Okay, you leave a certain point of time.
Okay.
You
10,
live
let's just use him, 10 years old.
10 years old. You spend 20 years, so now you're 30,
Uh-huh.
but then you come back to 10 years old.
Right.
Your 10-year-old self. So the last 20 years that just happened, did that just get eliminated? All the work you just did? Because now you're back in time to your 10-year-old self.
Clearly, you've never watched Back to the Future.
Well, he does say they have abilities for time travel.
So the abilities
So,
meaning that everything that has
person-
happened, that everything you did is still done.
I would imagine.
Well, and they think what he was saying was it's possible that they took his consciousness, just his consciousness, and put it into like a clone.
Yeah. So that's
And
one of
then-
my questions here too.
So
is it just his consciousness?
that's what he made it
gone?
sound like.
Yeah. Even though he said that at the very beginning, but then he tells this whole story, so I think you kind of forget about it because you forget about it.
My thing is, like, so I just don't know. Like, I mean, time travel is kind of a finicky thing. I guess.
I'm
with-
still testing it myself.
I guess
but-
with CERN, like even with the whole that galactic collider thing, I don't know what the hell it's called, but they're saying that in the near future, time travel will most likely be possible. So, if you've got tech from another life form from another planet somewhere else that's obviously farther advanced than we are here on Earth. It's entirely possible that time travel exists, and we don't understand the full mechanics of time travel because, like, we don't have it yet.
Right.
And
Tony Stark was just telling us before he died. And we still haven't
yeah, and
got all the
he
information
just
from
said,
him.
"I am Iron Man." And that was the end of time travel. I guess
This dude did say that.
You have to have a wristwatch that brings you back.
The time traveling does get policed, like super duper police
By the
force.
reptilians.
Yeah, so a lot. It sounds like anybody that is doing any time travel is under watch or whatever.
Right. And that brings up a question as well, right? So we have treaties with extraterrestrials. Our government does. If we have the U.S. Marines working on Mars, if we have the Navy running cargo for alien species, you know, and there's Germans. It's interesting.
Well, we all know Germans helped us get to the moon. We talked about that in a previous episode. And I'm not just making that up. Like,
Yeah.
Operation Paperclip was a thing. They brought over something like 4,500 German engineers and scientists, Nazis.
Right,
Like
right.
Werner von Braun, we talked about how
Mm-hmm.
terrible Nazi he was, but he was the head of the NASA program that got us to the moon. So I don't know where I'm going with that, but that,
Germans, man.
yeah, Germans. It's possible what we were talking about happened, time travel and stuff,
So what do you think, BT?
treaties with aliens. I think this is a very fantastic story, and I think it's 100% bullshit. But that's just my opinion. I'm not saying.
Why do you say that, though?
So as I'm listening to this guy's story,
Mhm.
he starts off telling the story saying that he was a crewman on an alien spaceship for 20 years. But at no point in time does he really actually talk about his time as like an engineer on the spaceship. He mentions it here and there, but he never actually, like, it's a very brief thing.
Maybe it's in the book.
Maybe it is in the book. And at the time of this interview, he was kicking around the idea of the book. Because, like we said, this interview was 2018. The book just came out at the beginning of this year,
Right.
February 2022. I don't, as I was reading, and so I looked up his book on Amazon, and I have to admit, like, there's something like 536 reviews on his book. He's got a 4.8 out of 5 star. I only found 3 1-star reviews. 89% of the reviews were 5 stars, and I think the other, like, another 12% were 4 stars. So you're looking at over 90% of the reviews were 4 or 5 stars.
Okay.
Very few negative. And one of the comments, one of the 1-star reviews, talked about how it seemed like, and before I even read this, I was thinking the same thing. That it just seems like they took, like, Star Trek, Star Wars,
Space News.
Stargate, Firefly, like all these sci-fi movies, and just kind of threw it into a blender, and this is what came out. And as he was talking about his experience on Mars with the bugs and like that, I was like, this is exactly like the plot of Starship Troopers with Casper Van Dien and Denise Richards. I think this is, to me, what it seemed like is he took all of these popular, like, sci-fi films, he took some aspects of different religions, and it's like, this happened to me.
Except he put a twist on that because he mentions Hollywood lies to you and makes it seem like space travel takes forever and that you're going from one galaxy to another and you're in the spaceship for a long time. He's like, no, we made multiple stops in multiple galaxies
In a day.
and was home by dinner.
Well, we all know Hollywood lies to us.
Well, I'm just saying it was
But-
just funny that he mentions that when. But
And he does talk about, like, the wealthy, the trafficking and all that, the human trafficking, which, I mean, unless you've been living under a rock, you're fully aware of the fact that, like, that is a thing that happens. Like, Ashton Kutcher and his wife Mila Kunis, like, they have I want to say an organization or charity that's actually trying to actively stop human trafficking.
Mhm.
So, I mean, he touched on a lot of stuff that is a lot of conspiracy theories. Not that human trafficking is conspiracy theory, that is real, but he's touched a lot on, like, popular science fiction and popular conspiracy theories, and threw it all into this one, like, fantastic story. And then this happened to me.
Now, I haven't heard all the stories, but what do you think about 5 other gentlemen saying similar stories that we did at 20 and back?
That I don't know. Like I haven't researched those people, so I don't know. One person did say that his book was very similar to the was it John Tidor the second. That gentleman actually wrote a book in 2016. So it came out about a year and a half after, because he said May 2015 is when he had the headaches, had the MRI.
Yeah.
So this other guy's book came out in August 28th of 2016. So about a year and a half later. And I don't know if you know anything about books. It's not an easygoing process. Like he said, he was kicking around the idea of writing a book in 2018. It was released 4 years later.
Tony, right.
So this other dude most likely came out with his story way before Tony started having headaches. And it just seems like kind of convenient to me. It's just like, oh, this guy has this happening to him. You know, he says this happened to him. I like that. I want that to happen to me too. I don't know. Like I've never met the guy, so I don't know. But it just seems to me that he just took like all the best parts of like sci-fi movies and religion, like the best and scary parts, and just threw it all into one big story. Not like I don't know whether or not it happened because I wasn't there. I can't say for sure. But that's what it seems like to me.
Being that it's based off of memories and things like that, like some of the thoughts that was going through my head when he was telling these things was he just having like reoccurring dreams, and it was like adding on to those dreams at different nights, and you know, and so when it did come back to him, it did feel like a memory because he dreamt those so many times, just didn't remember it, maybe. Or what if, you know, if they did make a clone of him and they took, you know, some of his consciousness and put it into another body, what if those consciousness somehow connected and that's where he's getting those memories?
But that actually might be possible because like our subconscious minds, like if you believe in reincarnation, which I think we all said we did on our reincarnating kids episode, your subconsciousness retains information from your previous lives. So it could be possible that instead of this being like some 20-year time travel alien abduction that he had, maybe it's just him remembering like a past life or something.
Or his consciousness in that other body came to the same moment in time that he was existing in, and that's how their connections happened.
Well, and that's the thing too.
They were like sharing the same space and time.
I've heard of stuff like that happening as well. So I mean, that's possible. It's within the realm of possibility, in my opinion.
But it is very fantastical to try to fathom that this is going on and happening, you know. But if it is, holy shit, that's crazy.
Yeah, because like, if you said if he's connecting with a past life or with a consciousness of something else, you know, kind of mixing, you know, the idea that space travel is happening constantly, even here on Earth, even though maybe we don't know about it. That's interesting. We're making trades with aliens, species. That's pretty nuts to think about.
I mean, there's a lot of UFO enthusiasts who mention that in different aspects, that the government is working with alien intelligence.
Well, and I think we covered that on our Men in Black episode.
Right.
Like, they're in these underground places. You know, going back to the story, Mars and the Moon having underground cities, underground bases, or this Ceres planet. Well, I don't know if Ceres is underground. That might be on the surface, but let's just do Moon and Mars. Do you guys think there's underground bases there?
No.
You don't think so?
No, I mean, with how many years the Mars rover's been on Mars, you think it might have found something by now of that effect?
Or is it really a Mars rover at all?
No, I'm pretty sure there's a Mars rover.
Is there?
Was the moon landing fake?
We should do an episode about that. Find out.
We should do that. No, I think there is a Mars rover. I think that's legit. I mean, that's going around. You think it might have found something? I think at one point Tony mentioned something about like the upwards of like 10 million people living on the moon now, living alongside with aliens. And if that's the case, like, and our government's fully aware of this, right? Mm-hmm. One thing I have to question: if this all did actually happen to him, where most of these stories, like these really popular ones, like even Betty and Barney Hill said, and I think even Travis Walton, like the two that I said I believe the most when it comes to alien abductions, even both of them mentioned something about the Men in Black visiting them.
Right.
Where's his encounter with the Men in Black? Why, like, if this fantastical story actually happened to him, why would the Men in Black kind of like gloss over this one and be like, yeah, no, let's let him tell a story.
Well, Ghosty,
So,
you told me you
yeah,
saw an
so
interview.
just based off what you were saying, I was looking for other interviews with this guy, and I couldn't find anything on YouTube besides one video, and this one video didn't even have his name in it. It just had the name of his book. And when I was watching that, it was this guy interviewing him, and the guy, he was mentioning how, like, he's all, this is the first book I've actually, like, picked up and wanted
No.
to. No one has their IDs.
What are you doing?
What are you doing over here?
You want to play on TikTok right now?
No, I opened YouTube.
So,
I didn't know I was going to start playing a video.
God, now I'm so lost. Where am I? Where
We're
am
talking
I?
about the interview.
The interview on YouTube.
Okay. So, anyways, he's talking to this guy, and the guy's talking about his book and how this is the first book he's been able to not put down. And then Tony starts mentioning how he's done about 250 something interviews, and none of them you can find online anywhere. He's like, you can't find any of them besides the one with the confessionals, and then this one that I found. Like, those were the only things I could find. And he says he's done over 250 interviews. Everything's been out there.
On the podcast, it's about he goes and speaks at like conventions.
And it seems like the only things out there of his story are things that don't have his name on it. Because the Confessionals podcast, it doesn't have his name. It just says the title of what it is and then a description of it. And then same with that other one that I saw on YouTube. It didn't have his name in it. Really, I mean, it probably mentions it somewhere because I was able to pull it up off his name. But yeah, it was really strange because he mentions that, and I was looking, so I was like, holy shit.
Yeah, you would think if he goes to these conventions, someone would pull out their phone and record parts of it. Just
So it
watch
almost
later.
seems like, is his stuff getting erased? Are they erasing like anything tied to him? Very strange.
Right. And he also said that why he remembers it, he thinks, is because there were things that he wanted to remember. For example, like the feelings of being out in space where he was scared. So he stayed in the seatbelt, but then regret for not being able to travel.
It just stopped.
Who stopped our audio?
I don't know.
Did it lose everything? Or
I
did it
don't
just
know. That was fucking weird.
Maybe the government doesn't want us recording about this topic.
What just happened? It just gave an error and stopped.
Well, I mean, we're still recording on YouTube, so we can pull this audio, I guess, if we need to.
Okay, we can do that.
But you're still recording right now, just in case?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, we'll see how this goes. Does the government not want us talking about this?
Yeah, did the government just stop us?
Yeah.
Because that was weird.
How would they even know?
Exactly. How would
We're
they
the
know?
EVP podcast. Hello, Beaker.
They're recording us. This house is bugged.
We're the world famous EVP podcast.
So there's a little, just to catch people up, because I don't know how much of this we're going to put in, but if you notice the audio quality on this episode is not very good. It's because, like, halfway through we were talking about how you can't find anything about Tony. Like, when you pull up his name, you can't find any of his interviews or anything online. And as we're talking about that, our computer that we record to had some kind of glitch, and we might have lost all of our audio. We're not sure yet.
Which we've recorded 80-something episodes on, and no issues.
Never had that before.
No, something really strange just happened. So I think it's interesting that as we're talking about, you can't find this guy anywhere. We might have lost our audio. So if it is at this point when you're listening to the show and it's not the good quality audio we normally have, we apologize. The government's out to get us.
Well, maybe we should stop this before they get that one too.
But it is weird. Like, I just kind of looking up right now. Yeah, I can only find the one.
I told you.
So let me ask you guys this question.
Hurry.
Why?
Because what if it shuts us down?
It's not going to shut us down.
Going back to the original story, or like the backstory. I mean, the kid and his dad, the Illuminati. Did his dad, this kid's dad,
Set this all up?
did he set this up? Because he's talking to his kid in another language or something like that Tony doesn't understand. And then all of a sudden the kid goes, "We can't do that to him. You got to use your resources, man." What resources?
They're in
Alien
cahoots. They're in
resources?
Maybe they
cahoots.
were just
So
speaking
does
Spanish.
the Illuminati have ties to these type of things? Are they in ties with Seattle billionaires that have sex slave?
Well, according
parties?
to Jim Carrey, yes, they do.
So I mean, it makes me wonder, like going back to the original backstory, because Tony feels something has to do with this, and he doesn't touch about it during the interview, but he kind of he brings it up for a reason, I think.
Can we talk about the mind reading
With the mantis?
with the kid?
Oh,
The kid
mind.
got this disgusted look on his face, and he's like, he kind of makes it sound like he thinks the kid actually read his mind.
Right.
Saying, I'm thinking maybe the kid just really couldn't read minds and was pissed that like he couldn't fool the girls anymore. Like, because I'm sure he was probably doing something that was just like easy, like sleight of hand magic that was tricking the girls.
Yeah, I mean,
And then he knew he couldn't pull it over on Tony. They're 10 years old.
Yeah.
So maybe he knew some magic tricks.
They're 10-year-old fourth graders. I didn't really care much about that part of the story. But the part that he goes up, hey, my dad's Illuminati, and then, hey, Dad, he ruined my confidence. They speak in things he doesn't
That's what
understand.
started the whole feud. This is why he exposed him to the girls that he couldn't actually read minds. So he wants revenge on Tony.
Oh, I see what you're saying. That's why he brought up the Illuminati.
Yep.
And his dad made threats to Tony.
He wanted
To
his
10-year-olds.
He wanted his Illuminati father to punish him for proving that he couldn't read minds.
Okay.
This is how the story starts.
All right. I do wonder if, and I don't know a ton about the Illuminati, but
I don't either.
I do wonder if this kid's dad might have started this whole thing. Like, all right, hey, this kid messed with my kid, and
So now you're going to space.
I want you to do something about it. Well,
Actually, Seattle, and then Peru, and then space. Or back to Seattle, and then space.
I mean, Tony said, and I don't know if you mentioned this during this, but when Tony wasn't the only kid at these places. There was, I know you mentioned there was boys on one side and girls on the other side of this Seattle billionaire mansion.
And he was the only one that survived the attack in Mars.
But there was there's dozens of kids everywhere he went. In Peru, he wasn't the only one. In Seattle, he wasn't the only one. On the moon, on Mars, he wasn't the only one. There was many kids. Makes you wonder. Are these all kids? Are all of these kids? It's their consciousness and their clones as well. There's a lot to unravel. Like the whole clone process and outer space stuff. Again, this is fascinating. If this is true, this is crazy, awesome stuff. If it's not true, it's great entertainment.
Right?
It's a great story. It's a great story. It's like a movie, It's like a book.
What is a book? You can
Yeah.
buy it.
It is a
Came
book.
out this year.
Series Colony Cavalier.
Well,
I think it's interesting.
He did talk about how, I think when he was in Peru or something like that, that they didn't do certain things because it would, like, as a 10-year-old, as a young kid, his mind wasn't all there, and he was kind of like, like mentally challenged in a way, I guess, because of the stuff they were doing. And part of me wants to say that, he has been this way his whole life, and he's still mentally challenged. I think it's all fiction. 100% fiction, in my opinion. I don't think any of this is true.
Go see what you think.
I have a hard time believing it. I think it was a cool story, and I would leave it as a story up until something gets proven.
Yeah. And like everything, even going back to the reincarnation, I don't know if these things really are true or not. I just find them fascinating, and that's why I do this podcast, because I wanted to try to research as much as I can. It kind of reminds me of like Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan doesn't really always say something is true or not. He just wants the information to construct ideas, or just have that information in his pocket, just to
Yeah.
Yeah, I would want to get a panel of all these guys in the same room and hear
the 6 guys.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be awesome? I mean,
Right?
I would
pretty
I would
awesome.
love to talk to this guy
and then
in
hear
person,
their
or like see
comparisons.
him on a panel or something, and see him in person to make it better. Like as of right now, just from that interview I listened to, it doesn't seem like it's real to me.
Hmm.
I'm not saying it isn't real. It just, in my opinion, it's not. And one of the issues I have with this guy, it's the whole interview, he's like, I'm just a normal guy, I'm not trying to make money off of this. And again, this was 4 years ago. A lot can change in 4 years. They kept saying he wasn't trying to make money off of it. He was just a normal guy. He's got his wife, his kids, his dog, whatever.
Yeah.
But now, if you want to, You go to his website. I believe it's Tony Rodrigues .com or something like that. I can't remember the website. But if you go to his website, he is offering, if you feel like you've gone through the 20 years and back, he's offering a $40 course that will help you jog your memory and get your memory of these 20 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to book a private one-on-one session and talk to Tony directly, that's $100 for that session. But this is just a normal guy that's not trying to make a profit off of this.
COVID, man.
COVID, man. I don't know.
Yeah, in the interview, he did talk about how he has now told his kids the whole story. Because he just wants them to know. He did kind of mention that, but he wanted to go on record, just if anything ever evolved in the future. They'd be, oh, well, Tony's been saying this the whole time, so he just kind of wanted to put it on record. So if in the future things do come to light of what happened, he can just be historically correct, because he put it out there at some point.
Well, it's on his book now, so if he says anything
that's
different, what's in the book?
Well,
We'll know he's fibbing.
Yeah.
As of right now, I can't say whether or not it's true. I don't know. I mean, I've never talked to the guy. I believe it's not.
What do you think about the story, then?
It's a fantastic story. Like you
Inspired
said,
his arm off?
it would make for a great movie if done by the right people. Not an independent filmmaker like I'm talking about, like, the MCU, Michael Bay, someone with, Martin Scorsese. Let's make it interesting.
no, I'd have Seth Rogen make it funny.
It would be Steven Spielberg actually doing this one because he did E.T. But like, if you have like a well-known like director, Chris Nolan even, not just some like independent filmmaker. Like if it's done right, this is actually will probably make a very interesting movie. But I don't think until I know more, it just seems too good to be true.
I think it's possible. I think it is possible. Don't say it's true. Don't say it's not true. I think it's possible.
Well, all right, should we wrap that up then?
Mm-hmm.
All right, those who don't play that.
Peace out, butterflies.
Aliens and Germans, man.
This is the EVP Podcast.